Hey, good morning. Can you guys hear me okay? Everyone can hear me? Good. All right. So first of all, I'm recovering from a mild bout of laryngitis, so we're going to make it through this. I mean, we're family. It's all love, so I think it's going to be good. So first of all, welcome to the opening gathering of the family reunion, celebrating 50 years of Black Morehead-Cain excellence. Now, I'm honored, indeed privileged, to moderate this, the Trailblazers Unite Pioneers panel. Now, the mission of Morehead-Cain is to invest in and empower a community of purpose-driven leaders. And this panel of distinguished Morehead-Cain pioneers is the embodiment of that mission. In each of their fields of endeavor, they have pursued their life's work with excellence, passion, and exceptional competence. Now, Kelsey and Janora shared with me that the key themes of this august and historic gathering are gratitude, joy, and celebration.
Amen.
Gratitude, joy, and celebration. You will hear stories today that will encompass all of those themes. And what we will receive today are compelling and inspiring stories and lessons learned. And perhaps this conversation will plant seeds for what we must do going forward to leverage our connectedness for impact. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce first Harvey Kennedy. Harvey, if you could come up, please. So Harvey Kennedy, class of '74, can you hear me? Okay, is the first Black Morehead-Cain to graduate from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He then attended Harvard Law School, where he received his JD in 1977. Harvey has spent the last 45 years practicing law in Winston-Salem in the law firm of Kennedy, and Kennedy, LLP. I mean, you can't really, that's a great name for
There's four Kennedy.
Four Kennedys. Oh, Kennedy, I missed the Kennedy. It's four Kennedys. Kennedy, and Kennedy, LLP. All brothers, cousins? I mean,
A mother, father, and two sons.
I got you. Okay, perfect. Okay, he is listed in the best lawyers in America and was selected as one of the top 20 employment lawyers in North Carolina Lawyers Weekly in 2021. Harvey serves on the Morehead-Cain Scholarship Fund Board and has served on the board of the National Urban League, the Winston-Salem Symphony, the Children's Center of Winston-Salem, and the National Black Theater Festival. Indeed, this is a bad man right here. Then next I'll bring up Karen Stevenson.
Is this okay?
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so the Honorable Karen Stevenson serves as Chief United States Magistrate Judge for the Central District of California, where in addition to handling her own docket of criminal and civil matters, she provides administrative leadership for 24 United States magistrate judges. Appointed to the federal bench on August 10th, 2015, Judge Stevenson is Vice Chair of the Magistrate Judge Executive Board for the Ninth Circuit and previously served on the Magistrate Judges Education Committee for the Ninth Circuit. She is a member of the Judicial Council of the Association of Business Trial Lawyers and serves on the board of the Federal Bar Association of Los Angeles. She is an elected member of the American Law Institute and a fellow of the American Bar Foundation and co-author of the Rudder Group Practice Guide, Federal Civil Procedures Before Trial. I mean, she wrote the textbook. Okay, for the past 9 years, she has served on the steering committee for Just the Beginning, a summer legal institute, which is a week-long program that introduces high school students from across greater Los Angeles to opportunities for careers in law. Earlier this year, Judge Stevenson received the Federal Magistrate Judges Association's Diversity Award for her work encouraging law students from underrepresented backgrounds to consider judicial clerkship and externship opportunities. Judge Stevenson earned her JD with distinction at Stanford Law School. She earned an MA in European History at Magdalen College, Oxford University, England, as a Rhodes Scholar. And I think important of note, and Karen actually did not mention this in her bio, but she is the first Black female Rhodes Scholar. All right, so next I will bring up Bob Wynn, Robert Wynn. Bob Wynn. Now, Robert's career spans 4 decades of leadership, advocacy, and innovation in the arena of economic development, which is very important for us as a people, and empowerment of underserved communities. Along the way, Mr. Wynn has found and led a variety of capacity building enterprises such as Urban Economic Development Association, Asset Builders of America, Land Rich, which I love the name of that entity, Akamai LLC, and Pro Squared LLC. Currently, Mr. Wynn is the founder and president of Climb USA. Climb is an acronym for Communities Learning to Invest and Mobilize for Business. The nonprofit promotes intensive investment education and facilitates wealth creation through community-based investment enterprises, which are an innovation on the traditional investment club model, and I certainly want to hear more about that. Prior to opening his own businesses, Mr. Wynn was the financial education officer for the Wisconsin Department of Financial Institutions. And earlier in his career, Mr. Wynn served as the Director of Minority Business Development at the Wisconsin Department of Commerce, where he developed and led efforts that resulted in tens of millions of dollars being invested in minority companies. So we thank you so much for that. Robert earned his law degree from the University of Michigan. He is a former board member of Better Investing and a former member of the Federal Reserve's Consumer Advisory Council, which is a pretty huge thing. And he currently serves on the board of directors of the University of North Carolina General Alumni Association and American Players Theater. Mr. Wynn and his wife, Millie Jones, live in Madison, Wisconsin. And finally, last but certainly not least, is Robyn Hadley. So Robyn Hadley is class of '85. Robyn is from Graham, North Carolina. She came to UNC not only as a Morehead-Cain Scholar, but as a varsity basketball player, and the first in her family to attend college. In 2023, she put her higher ed journey on hold and completed her term as Vice President, Dean of Students, and Chief Student Affairs Officer at the University of Virginia. Prior to that, she served as Associate Vice Chancellor and Dean, Office of Scholar Programs at Washington University in St. Louis, where she managed the university's merit-based scholar programs. From 2005 through 2014, Robyn served as the founding executive director of the alumnus Burlington School System's K-12 College Access Program, What's After High School, where which was a nationally acclaimed program. She's an entrepreneur, author, and professional speaker who spent 16 years in the private sector before pivoting to education, which she now dubs as her calling. As America's third Black female Rhodes Scholar and the first from the South. Now, think about this. She was the first in her family to go to college. She was the third Black female Rhodes Scholar. That's an amazing journey, and so we'll be so excited to hear more about it. Currently, Robyn is spending time with family and friends in Alamance County, as well as traveling, writing, and consulting. She's a founding member of the Light on the Hill Society Scholarship to support the legacy of UNC's first Black graduates, and is volunteering her time to develop scholar programs and lead the board's strategic planning effort as Light on the Hill enters its 20th year of operation. Please give them a round of applause. So, can everyone hear me okay? All right. So my first question is a question for each of our distinguished pioneers. And I do want to spend a little bit of time on this question because I think your answers to this this question will be very enlightening and insightful. And I'll lead off with Harvey. So Harvey, the question is, how did your experience as a Morehead-Cain Scholar shape your career and your life path? And perhaps you could start by talking a little bit about your early life experience and how you learned more about the Morehead-Cain and why you accepted the opportunity to come here as a Morehead-Cain Scholar.
Well, thank you. It's a privilege to be here with all of you this morning. I grew up in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. My family's been in Winston-Salem since the 1880s. And my great-grandfather came to Winston-Salem as the first African American physician. And I had another great-grandfather who came to Winston-Salem back in the 1880s, who was a lawyer and became president of what's now Winston-Salem State University, but he was a Greek and Latin scholar. But my family's been very much a part of the history of Winston-Salem. But when I was in the 6th grade, all the schools in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, were segregated. And there was a program for gifted and talented African American students. Of course, because everything was segregated, it was an all-black school. And there was an all-white school in Winston for white kids in that program. And I recall my parents telling me one day that they had made arrangements with the school board, and my brothers and I would be going to the white school where they had the gifted and talented program. So we integrated the school system in Forsyth County. But there were 6 prominent black families in Winston-Salem who had agreed to send their kids to this elementary school in a very wealthy area of Winston-Salem. So we showed up the first day, and it was my brother. I have a twin brother, and we were both in the 6th grade. And my youngest brother was entering the 1st grade. And so we showed up at this elementary school, and all the other black families didn't show up. So we were the only black family, so we were the only black kids coming to this school. So we integrated this elementary school.
Harvey, you know, that was an interesting time in our history as a nation and in that community, particularly in Winston-Salem, a southern town. Why is it that your family proceeded to send the two of you to that particular school and the other families backed out? What was it about your family that you felt might have insulated you from the risks that the other families felt?
Well, my parents were both lawyers. They were both heavily involved in the civil rights movement. Just to share a quick story with you, my parents finished Howard Law School back in the early 1950s. And they had a case in the late 50s and early 60s called Simpkins versus the City of Greensboro. But it was a case that went all the way to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 4th Circuit, but there was an ordinance in Greensboro that prohibited African Americans from playing on city golf courses. And my parents filed a lawsuit in federal court, and like I said, this was back in the 1950s, and they won the case. But then the city appealed it to the U.S. Court of Appeals in Richmond, and their panel of judges was made up of 2 judges who had histories of being racist, and they had both been turned down when they were nominated to the U.S. Supreme Court. There was a Judge Haynesworth, recall back in the Nixon administration, who was nominated, and he was rejected. And then there was a Judge Parker who was also rejected. I think he might have been back in Herbert Hoover. He was a much older person. But anyway, their panel was made up of a very conservative panel, but they won anyway. So they got a victory at the Fourth Circuit. And it integrated not only golf courses in the South, but a lot of public recreational facilities throughout the South. So my parents had a very strong civil rights background, and some of the other families, I think they just got scared. I mean, I think they decided they just didn't want to take that risk. But the next year, when my brother and I went to the junior high, which was right near the elementary school, the other parents sent their kids to the junior high school next year. But I was giving you this background about my family, so I ended up going to a high school in that same area where this elementary and junior high school were located. It was a large high school called R.J. Reynolds High School. It's a public high school, but the Reynolds family, R.J. Reynolds family, gave a lot of money to the school. So it's sort of like quasi-private, quasi-public kind of thing. But when they gave all this money from the R.J. Reynolds family to the high school back in the 1920s, they had the most expensive auditorium in the United States for any high school. And that auditorium is beautiful, it still exists. But so telling you about the school integration, integration was still in its early stages when I was in high school. And they had what in Winston-Salem called a freedom of choice program. So you could go to any high school in Forsyth County you wanted to because they had a freedom of choice. Well, what happened at Reynolds High School was that because of this freedom of choice program, we got the top students, black and white, coming to Reynolds, and the top athletes, black and white, coming to Reynolds, which created like these sports dynasties in Forsyth County. But just having, so I'm in high school, and my brother and I were two of the top high school debaters in the United States. So there were two national high school programs in North Carolina on the National High School Debate Circuit. My high school, R.J. Reynolds, and High Point Central in High Point. And to really be one of the top high school debaters in the country, you had to go to what's called the National High School Debate Institute at Northwestern University. So my brother and I went there, and they take the top 100 high school debaters at that time in the country, and there were 3 African Americans out of the 100. So my brother, myself, and then there was a young man from Southern Illinois. And one person who was there with us that summer was Merrick Garland, who's the current Attorney General of the United States. But what they wanted to do was create the top high school debaters in the country, and they were really about winning national high school debate championships. And so my brother and I were two of the top high school debaters my senior year. So when it came time to think about going to college, this, like you said, this was back in the late 60s, early 70s. We weren't really thinking about going to a college in the South. That was just something we really thought about. So we were thinking about going up to New England. Sure. So back in, I guess around the January of 1970, my brother and I had pretty much decided to go to Dartmouth College. We were leaning toward going to Dartmouth. But then I was nominated by my high school for the Morehead Scholarship, and R.J. Reynolds High School over the years had several Morehead Scholars. So I knew about the program, I knew it was a very prestigious honor. So I go through the process, and I get to the Central Committee, and everything went very smoothly. But there were back at that time the Morehead Scholars were all male. And all white males. And so when I went for the weekend, I was the only African American at the finals, and there was one other young man from Phillips Exeter Academy, but he decided to go to Yale. So So I finished my interviews, and the chairman of my interview committee was Archie K. Davis, who at the time was from Winston-Salem, and he was chairman of Wachovia Bank and Trust Company. And he knew my parents. But I had a great interview with the committee, and then as I left the room, the executive director of the Morehead Foundation at that time, who was named Roy Armstrong, took me down a long corridor and said he wanted to talk with me, and we got down to the end of the corridor, and he said, well, Mr. Kennedy, I just got one question to ask you. If we offer you the Morehead Scholarship, will you come to Carolina? And I told him, absolutely, I would be there. So that's sort of my journey in terms of getting to Carolina. So I get to Carolina, I get a call from the head coach of the debate team that summer, and he wanted to know if my brother and I would consider joining the varsity debate team in Carolina. So I started off. It turned out the Carolina debate program became like the dominant debate team in the United States.
Harvey, that's very impressive. Let's take a step back. So, at the time, did you feel the weight of the significance of being the first, I guess back then it was just Morehead Scholar, John Motley Morehead Scholarship. Did you feel the weight of being the first Morehead-Cain Scholar at that time? Did you understand the significance of that?
Yes, I think I understood the significance, but by that time, with my experience in integrated schools, I sort of drifted very seamlessly in and out of the black and white worlds, right? So it was just sort of went with the flow. I mean, I didn't put a lot of emphasis on it, but I did understand the historic significance of it.
And as you spent your time here in Carolina, did you, maybe the question I want to ask is, the racial atmosphere at the time, how was that experience for you? This would have been 71 when you would have come to Carolina?
Yeah, 1970.
1970.
Yeah. The racial experience, well, actually, racism hit me in the face the first day I was here in Carolina. I went to class, I was in the honors program, so I went to my first classes, honors English class, honors political science class, went to get my check from the Morehead building, went to the bank, went to debate practice. So I get back to my dorm room, after all that's over with, toward the end of the day, and my white roommate had moved out. And I found out he was in my honors English class. So I found out the next day when I talked with him, I said, what happened, And he said, well, he told his parents he had a black roommate, and they rushed down to Chapel Hill from Greensboro and moved him out of there. So that was really that was the first day I was at Carolina, but my overall experience was very positive at Carolina, and I ended up living at Granville Towers the next year.
Go Granville East.
My first year I lived at Morrison dorm, and then I didn't really care for that, so I moved to Granville. And Granville was brand new at the time, so it had all wall-to-wall carpet, and they call it the Country Club of Chapel Hill. But it's where the Carolina basketball team lived there, right?
Sure, right.
So they became, I knew all the basketball players. I'd have dinner or lunch with them all the time, but there were very few African American students living there. But it turned out to be a great place.
You moved on up to the east side.
Yeah.
So Carolina has a proud tradition of student-led protests. During your time here, did you experience that? What was your involvement? Could you speak more about that?
Yeah, there was a big march on the administration building my senior year at Carolina. We had hundreds of students that marched on the administration building. But it was toward the end of my senior year, and I participated in the march. But it's a very funny story, actually. The chancellor of Carolina at the time was a very patrician gentleman by the name of Farragut Taylor. And Farragut Taylor was a lawyer. He was a corporate lawyer on Wall Street, and he was tapped to be the chancellor of Carolina. And he, of course, he graduated from Carolina. He was a Rhodes Scholar, went to Harvard Law School, and had a distinguished career on Wall Street. So they asked him to be the chancellor at that time. Well, Farragut Taylor had a daughter who lived at Granville Towers named Louise, and she was a good friend of my brother and myself. We used to have lunch or dinner with her a lot. But every Sunday at Granville Towers, they had a steak dinner. And they had all this ice cream they would bring and all these different flavors of ice cream. So that was like a big thing every Sunday at Granville Towers, and Chancellor Taylor and his wife would come over and have dinner frequently, and they would ask my brother and me to have dinner with them. So we talk about Carolina and what the chancellor needed to do in terms of increasing the number of black students and black faculty, and he wanted to know how he could make the university better for black students. So now they get to this march on the administration building. So you got all these kids walking up to Chancellor Taylor's office, and they're thinking it's going to be some confrontation. Maybe they'll take over the administration building. But the leaders of that group, of the black student movement, going to meet with Chancellor Taylor. Of course, he thought all this stuff out in advance. So they meet with him for a short period of time. He comes out on the balcony at South Building, and they have the microphones out there, and he announces to the crowd that he's had a great meeting with the leaders, and they've given him a list of demands, and he's going to make sure that he addresses each of these demands, that he's ready to make changes in Carolina. And of course, a lot of that came about through conversations we'd had with him for some time. But that was an interesting story.
Well, not only is that an interesting story, but that's a great example of how you left an impact and how you left a legacy here and left your imprint. So as we kind of fast forward and look at your life after graduation, can you talk a little bit about that and how your experience as a Morehead-Cain equipped you for some of the challenges or obstacles that maybe you faced as you were progressing through your career?
Okay, good. Well, let me tell you, one thing I would talk about would be my experience as chairman of the board of trustees of the Winston-Salem Urban League. I was asked by an executive director who was sent from New York City to Winston-Salem to revive that urban league if I would join his board. And then I became like the president of it for some time. And I would go to these national conventions, and then there was an opportunity for me to be elected to the National Board of Trustees of the National Urban League. I was elected representing the southern region. So over the years, I developed a very close relationship with Vernon Jordan, who was the executive director of the National Urban League, and he became one of my mentors.
Amazing.
And then, he decided to move on at one point and go back into the practice of law. And Vernon became like the top lawyer in Washington, D.C. He was really like a lawyer's lawyer. But it was a funny story that when he left the Urban League, he called up some of his friends, white friends who had been on the boards with him at the Urban League, or people he knew in New York City. And he told them that he was thinking about leaving the Urban League and going back into the practice of law, and he wanted to ask them about becoming a partner at their Wall Street law firms, and he said it was surprising to him that they weren't interested, that he got a lot of pushback. So he called a friend of his who was chairman of the National Democratic Party, Bob Strauss, who had a big firm in Dallas, and he told Bob Strauss what his plans were, and Bob told him, well, I just set up an office in Washington, D.C. It was Strauss's law firm called Aiken, Gump, Strauss, Har, and Fell. He said, we're just setting up this D.C. office, and we got 6 lawyers that we're starting this office with. And they had like a summer intern who was my cousin, who was a year behind me at Harvard Law School. And so they just started off with just a few lawyers, right? So he tells Vernon, said, Vernon, we'd love to have you. You can come to Washington, D.C. and be a partner here. And that's what happened. Vernon came in, and that firm has like over 1,000 lawyers in D.C. That was huge.
Sure, he was certainly one of the top power brokers in Washington, D.C., for sure.
Well, Vernon had he was like a guy that had like a super Rolodex. He was a rainmaker. Right?
Well, Harvey, this has been fascinating, and obviously with each of the panelists, we really could spend I could spend all day learning more about you, and certainly want to continue to hear more about you as well. Can everyone give Harvey a round? Thank you so much. So next I'm going to turn to Karen Stevenson. So Karen, the same question. How did your experience as a Morehead-Cain shape your career and your life journey after graduation?
Can you hear me? Is this on?
Sure.
Okay. Wow, big question, because it's been a long time. Robyn graciously disclosed her age yesterday, so I feel I'll do you a solid, Robyn. I'm 7 years old. I'll be 68 in December. So it's been a long time. How being a Morehead Scholar, now Morehead-Cain Scholar, has shaped my life. I have to start at the beginning. I'm not going to take 68 years, I promise. I did not want to come to Carolina. I had no intention of ever living in the South, of being in the South, of going to school in the South. I grew up in Washington, D.C. So first of all, I was an out-of-state student in Chapel Hill. And second of all, because I was out of state, I had gone to a prep school in New England, a boarding school. I grew up in Washington, D.C. My mom was a public school psychologist. She graduated from Howard, so I wasn't first generation college. My grandmother graduated from Tuskegee in 1924. And my mother looked at the public high school I was going to go to in D.C. We lived in Northeast, and was like, that is not happening. Go find a school to go to. And it turned out in 8th grade that my algebra teacher came to me and one of my friends, Jeanette, and said, the school, Stone Ridge Country Day School, which was a boarding school in Virginia, still exists, very horsey, daughters of senators and all that stuff. They were looking for black students to come, girls to come to Stone Ridge. And at the same moment that my mother was like, go find some place to go to school, you're not going to McKinley, my algebra teacher came to me and Jeanette and said, they're looking for talented black kids to take the admissions test to go to Stone Ridge. So that was the beginning of like little twinklings of going to private school. And then this is serendipitous, and it will get to why Carolina matters so much in my life and why I love this place and have been so blessed by my Morehead experience. At the same moment, my mother's colleague in the public school system, her daughter had just graduated from Vassar. She didn't know what she wanted to do. She was going to teach. She got invited to interview for a job at a private school in Connecticut called the Taft School that was going co-ed. Taft needed women teachers. It had been an all-male school, all-male masters is what they were called at the time for like 100 years. Val interviewed for the history teaching job at Taft. She was like, I don't really want to work for y'all, but I know this kid who's applying to private schools. Why don't you send her a catalog? It came in the mail unsolicited from the Taft School. I looked at it, so I applied to National Cathedral, Stone Ridge, of course, Sidwell Friends, all the usual suspects for y'all who've been around Washington, D.C. And then the Taft School was the only boarding school. And because like I didn't know about ABC, I didn't have any like scholarship sponsorship, when they did the financial aid analysis, it was gonna cost the same for me out of pocket to be a boarding student at Taft as it was to go to National Cathedral. And I was like, I think I'd like to go to boarding school. So off I went to the Taft School. It was the first year the school was being co-ed. So I had to have a roommate who was a white girl because there were two boarding ninth graders, me and Shelby from Tenafly, New Jersey. And that was the beginning of my experience that what it felt like to be one of the only. And I was just like, put your head down, girl, and do your best. And so I did well at Taft. I loved school. School was my happy place. And so senior year, Taft was on a list of private schools at the time that if you weren't from North Carolina, you could not, those schools could nominate people to be Morehead candidates. So senior year at Taft, I'm applying to schools. North Carolina is not one of them. There's no school in the South on that list whatsoever. And the school said they didn't ask you if you wanted to go to North Carolina. They just nominated the two seniors that they thought merited it, right? So they were like, come to me and say, we've nominated you for the Morehead Scholarship in North Carolina. I'm like, the what, where? But it's, you know, it's like February in Connecticut. I'm like, wait, so you're gonna fly me to a warmer climate for the weekend? Whatever, I'm going. I'll go. I had no, I mean, I didn't blow it off, but I wasn't thinking of coming to school in Chapel Hill. I just wasn't. And then I got the dang thing. And so I go back, and the school is all happy. And we were the first class of women Morehead as well. There were 12 of us, and they call us to this day the Dirty Dozen. They were here in September, the rest of my cohort. And of course, I was the only black woman in that bunch too. And so I go home and I'm like, Mom, I got this Morehead scholarship. I can go to University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill for free for 4 years. She's like, you're going there. I'm like, no, I'm not. I want to go to Stanford. I had worked so hard to go to Stanford. I really wanted to go to Stanford. No intention of going to Chapel Hill. What are you talking about? But if those of us who are parents now, and some of us have teenagers, mine are well past teenagers, but she's like, my sister is 18 months younger than I am, so she was going to go to college right behind me. And my mother was like, there's Stanford and there's Chapel Hill for free. There's Stanford and there's Chapel Hill for free. The first fight I ever had with my mother, I was sitting in her office and I was like crying and screaming, I'm going to Stanford. She's like, and who's paying for that? So I reluctantly caved, was beaten into submission, and came to Chapel Hill. And I love this place. It was extraordinary, truly extraordinary. And the thing about being in Chapel Hill and not having been from the South, what I loved about Chapel Hill and what I loved about this weekend is that there was no question that you were black. The race was obvious, overt, and specific. And that was important, really important, because you couldn't, it wasn't like, oh, I'm just smart and happen to be black. No, 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 no. You're in the South in 1975. You're black. Now you have to deal with all those other things that are on top of that, but you could not be here in the 70s. Maybe you can't be here now, some folks, and not actually be black and just, other folks had to deal with it. I didn't have to deal with it. Other folks had to deal with it. So I lived in Granville.
Karen, let's back up for a
Because it
second.
had air conditioning. I don't know about the ice cream, but it had air conditioning.
You went straight to the east side. So you were more like different strokes than the Jeffersons. Everyone
That's a
remembers
long story. Overdrink state.
So one of the, I guess it's meant to be a derogatory term today, it's used as a derogatory term, is a DEI candidate.
Right.
Did anyone ever obviously you're not, but did anyone ever confront or accuse you of that?
Never, because my grades were better than theirs. Seriously, I kid you not. It just, that piece of it, of like somehow that I was a token or shouldn't be here, and I really credit the Morehead-Cain trustees and foundation. I never got a whiff of that I was somehow chosen for the scholarship because it would be nice to have one in the bunch. My grades were outstanding, my test scores were outstanding, and it's really wonderful to be able to say that in this room and not feel like you're being bougie or you're being self-promoting. Yes. That's just a fact. That's what happened to all of us.
I feel that deserves a round of applause.
Yeah. The last time that happened to me, though, actually was at Taft when, in the spring of my senior year, when I was about to come to Chapel Hill. Back in the day, we got college admissions, but April 19th, you got it in the mail, right? And if you got the big envelope, you knew you got in. If you got the little envelope, you didn't get in. So I'm standing in the lab in an AP chemistry class, and one of my classmates is like, hey, Stevenson, because it had been a boys' school, they called everybody by their last name. So where'd you get in? I was like, none of your business. Where'd you get in? None of your business. I was like, leave me alone. And he asked me like 3 or 4 times. I said, fine. Harvard, Stanford, Princeton, and Cal. And he just looks at me and goes, you bitch. Literally. It was like, he went to UVA. So I'm like I took something from him. It was crazy. And I just went, I told you not to ask. But then I went to Chapel Hill. So, and I never felt that kind of overt racism here. I really didn't. I just went about my business. What I did know, I was never confused about where I was, though, because I lived in Granville Towers. I was walking over there yesterday, and I swear to God it was because of air conditioning. And I knew better. Because I didn't know about South Campus and North Campus, and Cobb and Hinton James. I didn't know that. I was like, which of those places has air conditioning? So I was walking, you'd have to come through the alley to come up to class behind the Sigma Nu House every day for 4 years that I was here. The Sigma Nu House had a massive Confederate flag hanging from that porch. Y'all know what I'm talking about? And people say, well, were you bothered by that? I was like, no. I'm like, thank you. So I know where not to go to parties after football games. Mark the territory. I'm not saying that's a good idea, but what I was saying, it didn't bother me in a certain way because it helped me. It was useful to know where certain kinds of people were hanging out. It's just a fact.
Sure. Yeah. So maybe we can talk about how you transitioned to Rhodes Scholar. And maybe just talk about that experience.
Yeah, again, friends matter. So my whole life the best things in my life has always come through people.
Yes.
Always come through people. So I wound up at Taft sort of randomly. Wound up here because my academic advisors at my prep school said, you would be good for this. And so coming into my senior year, a bunch of my Morehead friends were applying for the Rhodes. So there was 7 of us that were applying. And 5 of them were North Carolina residents. And so you had to apply in the state either where you lived or where you went to school. So I had 2 options, right? And at the time, only 2 could be nominated from, there were 2 levels of interviews. Only 2 could come from each state. And then you went on to a district interview. And I'm sitting there going, why should I go to Charlotte with 5 of my friends? They were Moreheads, knowing that only 2 of us could possibly move forward. And I have an option of applying someplace else. So I applied in DC, Maryland. And it was through my friends who were like, hey, KS, are you gonna apply for the Rhodes? So I was like, huh? And I was like, yeah, that sounds like I could probably go for that. That would be wonderful to just compete for it. And so I went to DC, Maryland as the state level of competition. And that year, when I got to the state, and it was Farabee Taylor, who was chancellor still at the time, who had been a Rhodes Scholar, who had to sign off on your institutional endorsement. You had to be endorsed by, you still do have to have an endorsement letter from your institution, undergraduate institution, to get in the mix, right? And so I go to the DC, Maryland interviews. I go home because my mom still lives in DC, and the interviews were at, they were Johns Hopkins, about 40 minutes away. And I get there, and I'm the only person who's not from an Ivy League school. All the other candidates were, from Ivy League schools. I was like, well, okay. And the thing I learned at Chapel Hill, and one of the blessings of this program, was that I got to just be myself. And I was just, well, this is what it is, and this is what I answer the questions, and also the fact that the Chapel Hill was a large state school, lots of different kinds of people from lots of different kinds of places and lots of different backgrounds. It made it, it's hard to be special in Chapel Hill. It's a big joint, right? It's a really big place. And you just don't know who your roommate's gonna be. My roommate in Granville turned out to be someone who's still one of my dearest friends. She had been the class president at Little Rock Central High School. Go figure. The last of the Little Rock Nine just died this past week. And Stacy is white, and she's still one of my dearest friends. You don't know, this is a big place, and that's a good thing. It's a really good thing to be able to just be yourself and take the circumstances as you find them. It's not, the Morehead experience is highly curated. Carolina is not necessarily highly curated. You have to take people as you find them, and they take you as you find them. Because thankfully, we don't wander around campus with these on our foreheads going, I'm a Morehead. And that's the blessing of this program. Really bright people come in, and it's like you blend into the water, you blend into the stream of this place and prove yourself without a label.
So Karen, in some of your previous talks, you mentioned the courage to do what makes your heart sing. Mm-hmm. Can you talk more about that and how Morehead-Cain has equipped you to do that throughout your life's journey?
One of the things that I loved about this experience, as I came here reluctantly and then have come to deeply, deeply love this place and this experience, is that no one told me what to do. Nobody told me what to major in. In the summer programs, I did not do the first year Outward Bound thing. I really didn't, because I was like, what, sleep in a tent? No, I live in DC. This girl does not sleep in a tent. So I didn't do Outward Bound, I didn't do National Outdoor Leadership School, and I was telling Chris a few years ago, to this day I regret that. I am now a huge outdoor person. In September I hiked the Dolomites with 3 friends in Italy. Last year I did a 35-mile hike on the South Island of New Zealand with 3 of my travel buddies. The Milford Track is a 35.5-mile. 2 years before that, we were hiking in India, and somebody talked about leeches the other day. Who was talking about leech? Was that you? I got a leech stuck on my ankle hiking in India. So, but people didn't tell you must do that. I was like, no, I'm not doing that. But I did the public safety summer. The summer after that, I worked for E.I. DuPont and Moores in the corporate experience. And then where Do What Makes Your Heart Sing comes in was the summer travel program, which started the year before us. I think we were the second year probably. And I put together a travel trip. No one told me where to go, how to go, what to do, how to plan it. But I studied Russian when I was here as an undergraduate. I'd done a lot of French. I thought I might go work for the State Department. So I started studying Russian in Chapel Hill. Nobody at Chapel Hill told me, that's weird, why does a black woman want to learn Russian in the 1970s? Nobody said that. They were just like, go forth, do, flourish, do it, figure it out, you know? It's the freedom to figure it out. So my summer travel program, I'd also done a lot of art history. So I spent a lot of time at Akron and loved art history. And so I put together this trip that I called the Great Churches of Muscovy, Byzantium, and Rome. So in the summer of 1975, I flew from Dulles Airport by myself to Moscow. I did Moscow, Kiev, Leningrad. I took a train. Some people have heard the story. I'm going to tell you the train story again. From Leningrad to Odessa, Kiev at the time was part of the Soviet Union. And it was a 3-day train trip down to Odessa. And then I took a boat from Odessa to Istanbul, where I met up with 4 other of my Morehead friends who were coming the other way from Greece. They were coming this way across Europe, I was coming that way. We met up in Istanbul, spent a few days there, took a train from Istanbul to Sofia, Bulgaria, because there's a very beautiful medieval church in Sofia. And then I took a bus from Sofia across Bulgaria into what was then Yugoslavia, still ruled by Tito. That was before the Balkan Wars, into Pech and down to Dubrovnik, and then a train from Dubrovnik to Florence, Venice, and Rome, and flew home from Rome by myself. And nobody told me you should not be traveling by yourself through the Soviet Union. And the Morehead folks were amazing, because they didn't say, how are you going to do that? Because you couldn't go at the time.
And for the young folks here, that was before the internet. So you
Oh, it was before the internet. You had to like get actual traveler's checks in paper. You had to have a map, right? There were barely your rail passes, and besides they didn't work in the Soviet Union anyway. But to their credit, here at Morehead House, no one ever said, are you out of your mind? How are you gonna do this? They were like, you do it, you figure it out, tell us how much it's gonna cost, and we'll fund it. It was that sense, what I got here in Chapel Hill was the ability to fully be myself. And I did not go straight to law school. There's like this 12-year hiatus. When I came back from the Rhodes experience, I was over school, beyond over school. And I just thought, I can't do the go to school and try to get the best grades anymore. I was supposed to go to Yale when I came back from England. And I remember standing in the what's called the Porter's Lodge at the college, because you had to have a phone. There were no internet, there were no cell phones. You had to like dial a phone and call somebody. And I called the admissions director at Yale and said, I'm not coming. I called my mom and said, I'm not going to law school in August. And she was like, she said, have you lost your mind? And it was just, I couldn't. I just felt my life had been, I couldn't be more performative. I felt all this performative pressure, and I was like, I gotta figure something else out. I just gotta figure something else out. And I literally bumped around for like 12 years. I just bumped around. I waitressed, I suck at it. I'm a really bad waitress. I came back to Chapel Hill thinking maybe what I wanna do is just go to a less competitive law school. So of course they gave me a Morehead to go to Carolina Law School. I was like, okay, that might work, just a little low key. I love Chapel Hill, it'll be fine. So I go to law school, I sit down in a civil procedure class on the first day, and the professor says, you should all be trying to make A's. And I was like, I'm out. Literally, I got up from that class, I walked to the registrar's office and said, I would like to withdraw. They were like, wait, what? I was like, I'm not staying here. And that was the one time Nevin Pritchett was upset with me. I will say, he was really upset with me. He says, no, don't quit, take a year. I took a year. And then 2 years. And I was like, and he's like, so what are you gonna do? I'm like, I don't know, but I'm not going to law school. And I bumped around and worked odd jobs and had twins. And then I was like, and I worked for a business. I did work for a business. And I was reporting to the head of that company, and I realized I didn't want his job. And now I have a reason to go to law school, because I had run a business. I've taken care of employees, dealt with employment law issues, and I was like, okay, now I have a reason to go to law school, and that's when I went to law school.
Perfect, great, it's a wonderful story. Everyone, please round. Thank you so much. So now we'll turn to Bob Wynn. Bob, same question. How did your experience as a Morehead-Cain shape your career and your life path after graduation?
It's been fascinating listening and learning from this seat as well. One of the things I didn't know I was going to say has to do with the fact that I actually grew up in Greensboro, and my lineage isn't quite as distinguished as Harvey's, but I really enjoyed hearing his story. And my dad was a major impact on my life. It's funny because I don't always give him the compliments that he deserves. But he was actually one of the first African American dairy extension specialists for the country, and had actually had to matriculate up north himself to go to Michigan State to get his master's degree, because after Hampton Institute, there were not many options for post-collegiate study. And this was back in the late 30s, early 40s. He had gone to Michigan State and then came back from Georgia and then moved up to North Carolina. And though he was employed by the state, he was an employee of North Carolina State, where the Extension Service was housed. But because African Americans could not have offices on the campus of North Carolina State, the dairy extension specialist had to be placed in A&T. So it's interesting, as I'm sitting here realizing that in another scheme of things, I would have been a resident of Raleigh. I would have been telling people as I was at UNC that I'm from Raleigh, but actually I was from Greensboro. And the reason was because of where my dad had worked.
And just to be clear, Bob, so your father had to move to a different city, a different location because of racial segregation.
That's exactly right. There was just no office facility available at the North Carolina State campus at that time. I grew up in the late 50s, early 60s, and we anticipated, because of perhaps some of the Kennedy litigation and others, that there would be desegregation, and that eventually we would move to Raleigh, and we had bought some property that my dad had, and we thought that we would move. So once the opportunity availed itself, we decided that we liked Greensboro quite a bit, and we ended up staying there. And another sort of connection to Winston-Salem was this whole idea of prep schools. I actually had an interesting experience also as a child, having gone to Nigeria to live for 2 years when I was 8 years old to 10 years old. And again, my dad just had a special opportunity because of Michigan State, where the State Department had a contract with Michigan State to have some of their professors, staff people, and alumni to help Nigeria as they were just becoming a independent country to get established another university type of system that was somewhat patterned, I think, after the United States collegiate systems. So we had gone there, and then from there came back to Greensboro, and I ended up going to a private Catholic school. And my mother, I was one of 4 children, the youngest and the only boy. So I was doted upon, and my mother would constantly tell everybody that Bob's going to Harvard, Bob's going to Harvard. So somewhere my dad was in Winston-Salem. I don't exactly know who he was talking with, but he said, well, if your son really wants to go to Harvard, he should go to a prep school. And my dad learned about him, and then he was quite a forceful parent and said, you're going to apply to prep school. So I ended up applying to several of them, somewhat reluctantly, but ended up getting accepted to Deerfield Academy, and got excited to go once I learned more about it and realized that it would be a great educational opportunity. So I went there for 4 years, from 9th grade through 12th grade. And another thing that hit me just last night, I was thinking about this question, that but for the Morehead, which I was nominated for through that prep school, I would have gone to Stanford University. From a prep school like that, many people do stay in the New England area and go to some of the schools up there. I had, at prep school, there were 3 African Americans in my class. One of them, of course, was an excellent lifelong friend. You're friends with the people that you identify with, and he was hell-bent on staying in the New England area for or at least going to an Ivy League, and we were supposed to apply to colleges together, but I had had enough of that area and decided that I wanted to apply for some schools outside of the New England area. And Stanford was just where I had my heart set. I never did go out there and visit, but knew enough about it that I thought it would be an excellent school for me. As I was thinking about colleges, my dad, after retiring from the state, ended up selling insurance for Prudential. He did very, very well there because he was quite a networker. And he got to go to these insurance, I guess, gatherings at different places, and they'd gone to one in Northern California, and they ended up at Berkeley. They said, the one place we will not pay a dime for you to go to is Berkeley. So that was off the table, although I was kind of impressed with Berkeley. And somehow I got nominated for the Morehead from our prep school. I wasn't quite the stellar student. I was upper middle in my performance in schools, and I think the school wanted to appoint or nominate some people that would really likely go. And it was because I was awarded the Morehead, and in my recollection, we had to actually accept, if we were going to accept it, before we learned about admission to our other schools. It was a little bit advanced because we had to come in March, and shortly after that, we got our offer. So I was in a total quandary, but my parents' minds were made up. I was going to USC Chapel Hill. So I ended up coming here, and then about 2 or 3 weeks later, got the letter from Stanford that I had been accepted there with enough scholarship that I would have been able to make it. But I'm glad that I came here too. I knew that for me, going to an all-boys prep school, that I wanted to go. I felt like I missed that public high school experience. And when I come back to Greensboro and talk to my friends and hear about just all the escapades of high school, I felt like I was missing some of that. So I wanted to go to a big school, and UNC was really, I think, great for me. I enjoyed it thoroughly.
You know, Bob, you're not just a Morehead-Cain pioneer, but you're also a pioneer in the area of economic development, economic empowerment for underserved communities. Where did that come from? Did that start here at Carolina? Was that before Carolina? What drove that passion?
So one thing, I was here and finished in the class of 76, so I started in 72. It's funny because when I look back, I never would have called myself a pioneer, having come here, and I suppose to some degree I was a pioneer with the Morehead. But back then, the Morehead was very low-key, so I was just another student here, and there had been other students before me, so I really didn't see myself as a pioneer, so to speak. But my dad actually grew up in southern Georgia, and he basically grew up as a sharecropper, and he was from a fairly large family. There were 5 boys, 2 girls. The boys worked the fields, very southern, just utterly racist area of Georgia, and he worked the fields until he was 19 to 20 years old. Broke his leg, and couldn't go to a hospital because they weren't accepted at hospitals, African Americans. So they had to set his leg, and while the leg was healing, he was just reading the books of his sisters and so on. And then after it got healed a little bit, it wasn't healing correctly. They had to re-break his leg and reset it so he got to study more. Then decided that he would go on to school once he kind of got into some of the books. He was quite behind. What was it? He was 21 in the 7th grade, I believe, and then had to play a lot of catch up and went to Fort Valley, which was a high school at the time, and then from there went on to Hampton, hitchhiked up there. So being the only boy, he just told me a lot of what you would actually call graphic examples of racist experiences, literally beatings, lynchings, fights that his brothers had to encounter. And I listened and didn't really think it was sinking in necessarily, but after law school at Michigan, where I was with Harvey's brother, Harold, we overlapped by I think a year, I practiced law in Detroit for about 2 years, and it felt, it didn't resonate with me because I was practicing with the UAW employees doing wills, trusts, and real estate. But oftentimes, it was a process of unraveling contracts. People would come to us after they'd already gotten into an issue, and then we were looking to help them resolve a legal issue after the fact. So my experience there was reactive. I had an opportunity to go to Wisconsin, where another colleague had run for office, and had a chance to work at the state level in Wisconsin, first as a legislative analyst helping to develop laws. And this legislator represented Milwaukee, which had a lot of economic challenges and needs, and got really interested in the policy relating to economic development, and just really began to see that even the policies were geared toward the more mainstream entrepreneurs, larger businesses. At that time, technology was emerging and all of the emphasis was there. A lot of the minority companies were not at the point where they could even avail themselves of these so-called resources and programs that were offered. So I began to work with legislators to craft legislation. Actually, Parent Mitchell was doing this at the federal level with EPA legislation and creating provisions that would provide more attention to minority-owned companies.
So, yeah.
We saw
Karen
that-
Mitchell, another giant.
Yeah, Parent Mitchell was a congressman at the time, really considered the father of minority business development. And we saw opportunities to kind of clone the concepts that were being applied federally to do the same kinds of policy initiatives at the state of Wisconsin. So we were able to work on those policies and created initiatives for minority-owned companies to have better opportunities for procurement, things of that nature. And then, of course, it created a little bit of a implementation of bureaucracy. So I moved over to the State Department of Commerce and got to implement some of those laws through the Minority Business Development Office. But it was then a companion agency that did some research on the wealth gap and wealth issues. And it just literally stood me out of my chair when I began to learn the very pronounced wealth gap based on race. Back then, I remember the median wealth, this was back in the 90s, for an African American household was $6,000, which was telling me that half the households in the United States that were black had less than $6,000 to operate from. And I realized that to try to build a entrepreneurial class with a population that has no wealth, you're actually building a house of cards. And I felt that, I don't know, I was just, you talk about purpose, I just felt that from that point, my purpose became to promote and advocate for building wealth in communities of color. And from there, just segued into financial education and wealth building programs.
Very good. Thank you so much. Turn to Robyn. Robyn, same question. How did your experience as Morehead-Cain shape your career and life path after graduation?
First of all, I'm honored to be on the panel. I don't think I ever thought of myself as a pioneer in this space as well. I'm also now realizing that the three of you are attorneys. And I always wanted to be an attorney, and the only person in my friend group who's not an attorney, at least the group I came through with in Chapel Hill. So I will tell you that one of the things that I have learned during my extended gap year in the last year is to be a little more transparent, I think. I think also when you free yourself from some things, you probably say some things that you wouldn't have said a year or two earlier. So I will tell you that in the course of preparing for the panel today, I cried this morning. And the reason I did that is that you don't realize sometimes, until you are in settings like this, how much of yourself you actually hold in, or that you have held in. Because you are the first, or the few, or the only. And so I'm delighted to see my brother and sisters from Alamance County who are here. And I think there are 6 or 7 of us of color who are Rhodes Scholars, which is amazing. And so I think for me, one of the things that we don't talk about here, we don't generally talk about even at the Black Alumni Reunion, is the issue of class within our community. So as you heard, I was the first in my family to go to college, and Alamance County is a very interesting place. And so, as I told the undergraduates yesterday that I had a chance to speak with, when we filled out the application, during my time, you had to list your parents' occupation. And so, in my application, it said school secretary and manual laborer. I remember asking my mom what to put in the blank for my dad. And I think his formal title was dock foreman. And he was relieved of that when they found out he actually didn't have a high school diploma. And so I remember saying, I'm never going to get this scholarship because everybody else is going to say mother accountant, dad lawyer, mother stay at home, dad professor. And so I think for me, being introduced to the Morehead was just like, being at an Oprah show where she says, you get one, and you get one, and you get one. I think the most important thing that the Morehead did for me was to show me the power of possibility when money is not an issue. Because when you grow up in an environment, and we would not have been classified as low income, but we were a working class family. But money was always at the center of kind of discussions about what we could have and what we could do and where we could go. So the idea of a Morehead was this kind of priceless thing that allowed you to do things and not be worried about how much it cost. And I want to make a comparison because I was very fortunate to get a full athletic scholarship to Duke and a full scholarship to Harvard, which was ultimately going to be funded by the late Alex Haley. And that came after I got a call from the financial aid office at Harvard. And I remember standing in our kitchen, and my dad was in the kitchen standing over the sink. And the nice lady at Harvard told me how much I was going to have in order to come to Harvard University. The number I remember processing was astronomical. And I just remember, be polite. And then she told me the number. And I just remember processing, that will never happen. And I got off the phone, and my dad said, so what did she say? And I gave him the number. And he said to me, that costs more than our house. And I remember that was the first time that I had processed or had any capacity to process what a private university would cost, the cost of a house. I knew I wasn't clear at the time whether I wanted to play basketball for 4 years, and if I only did that for 2 years at Duke, I was going to be right back at exit 148. So the Morehead, again, was this incredible opportunity. The internships, the summer internships, just unimaginable as someone from exit 148 to literally just kind of understand that you could go anywhere in the world. So the power of possibility. The other thing I learned from the Morehead is that there is a difference between leadership and power.
Yes.
We spent a lot of time talking about leadership and leadership development, but power is a very different thing. And so I think I learned some of that from Mebane Pritchett. I learned some of that from some folks at my high school, and I think probably very key points for me were that I was not initially selected as a finalist from my community. So I actually got a letter that said, thanks, but no. And my counselor went to our school system superintendent and advocated for me for some reconsideration. What I learned sometime later was that our superintendent had come here to speak to Mebane Pritchett and advocated for me because because in our community at the time, the school system, I think, was kind of close to merging or kind of figuring out integration. Some of you have heard me speak about Lisa Jeffries and the fact that she was the first Black Morehead from our community, and she was kind enough to speak to me by phone about kind of that experience, and kind of that's how I learned about it. I had the good fortune of going to governor's school with Lorianne Harris, whose brother was Kelvin Harris, and so Kelvin was really the first kind of Morehead scholar who looked like me to help me understand kind of what he had been through in terms of the process. And while I didn't get to...
By the way, is Kelvin here?
He is. And so while I didn't get to spend a lot of time with Kelvin, I did spend a lot of time with Kelvin's parents. And Kelvin's mother made him sound like Superman. And so, and when you would meet Kelvin, he was just focused. He was going to be a doctor. There was just something about the way that Kelvin carried, himself. And so ultimately, there was no question, if there was an opportunity to apply for the Morehead, that was something that I wanted to do. So, long story short, Alamance County had 4 finalists that year instead of 3. And I was able to advance and ultimately come here and became a Morehead Scholar. And so that just opened an incredible door. And when I talk about power and possibility, what I mean is that when you get a letter that says no, and a white man, in that instance, could make it into a yes, hello,
That's power.
you understand that there are rules, but there are also ways to navigate rules in a way to get the outcomes that either you want or that people want.
Robyn, that's so powerful. There's so much to learn from you. And so my next question, I want to start with you, but I actually want the other panelists to weigh in as well. What advice would you give to this audience of pioneers, particularly current scholars and young alumni? What advice would you give them based on your experience that would help them to be even more successful in their life journey?
I think probably one of the first things, and I have to give credit to my fellow planning committee members, is you have to take time to be grateful. You have to be intentional to carve out time or create space where when you come up against an obstacle, that you take a breath and say, okay, now let me assess where I am. And if I want to get over this thing here, the obstacle, what does it take to do that? Because I think when we're younger, we just go right through it. Whatever it takes, you just go right through it. But as I got a little bit older, I came up with a saying that says, backing up is not giving up. And what I learned is that there are a lot of obstacles sometimes you just have to back up from, because you will spend so much of your energy trying to get through or around or under that it doesn't help you. So sometimes you have to back up from obstacles because the people who are around that may be able to help you either get through, around, under, or over that obstacle can whisper in your ear. And if you're not a person who can kind of step back and be reflective of what it is you're trying to get to, through, around, or under, then you don't give yourself time for other people to kind of help you figure out how to do that, or to wait for that obstacle to come down. And so I think one, just doing your homework. I mean, at the end of the day, as Karen said, her grades were stellar. So there wasn't a lot that her classmates could say, because I think at the end of the day, you have to do the work, you have to do the homework, you have to be prepared so that when the door is open and you get the seat at the table, you aren't just there saying, I'll get back to you. You have had some deliberative time or reflective time or opportunity to do some due diligence so that when you get a seat at the table, whatever table it is, you are well prepared to advocate again for the things that need to happen.
You know, that reminds me of a saying, and I'm sure many of you have heard it before. Success is where opportunity and preparation meet.
Absolutely.
That's wonderful. That's great. Anything else you would add?
One last thing I'll get at. I know we don't have much time. Again, these are just incredible stories, but I think for me the other piece was that I was not the university's nominee for the Rhodes Scholarship the year of my election. And so to go through the process and not see your name on the list and say, okay, I'm going to prepare for the LSAT now, and to have two fellow Morehead scholars come to me after fall break and say, you know, we heard that you weren't selected by the university. What are you going to do? Well, my answer was, I'm going to study for the LSAT. And their response to me was that, you know, you can apply independently. And I said, no, you can't possibly apply independently for the Rhodes. And they said, yes, you can. And my two classmates who were from Chevy Chase and from Greenwich, Connecticut, I figured knew more than somebody from exit 148. And so I went to Mevin Pritchett, and again, this power of possibility. For any of you who ever saw Mevin Pritchett work a phone or work a room, I went to him and I told him, I said, two of my classmates said I could apply independently for the Rhodes. I said, I've never heard that. And his general response was, let me make a few phone calls. And I came back that afternoon and he said, yes, you can apply independently for the Rhodes. And I was like, well, how do you do that? And as he said, what we are going to do, you know, when you hear that, it's like, we are going to do this. And he said, you're going to go back to the chair of the selection committee and have him critique your application. And if you agree with what he says, then that's fine. But if you disagree with his critique, ask him what happens if you apply independently. And so he prepped me for this conversation with the chair at the time. And I went to see him, and I disagreed with his critique of my application. And I said, so what happens if I apply independently? And he says, I will inform the committee that you are not the university's nominee and you will not receive a university endorsement. And I said, I'd like the application. And he gave me the application. And I went back to see Mr. Pritchett. And I said, what do we do now? And of course, there were other Moreheads who were finalists. And he said, what we're going to do now is you're going to go and talk to your referees and tell them you are not the university nominee. And should they choose to write your letters of recommendation, they need to understand there may be some political pushback. And you need to understand that if you are going to do this, anything can happen. And I remember saying to myself, the most important thing I want to make sure doesn't happen is that no other Morehead, particularly no other Black Morehead, is harmed in any way because we attempt to do this. And so lo and behold, I went to all of the referees and I told them exactly what happened. And I remember one specific situation. I went to see Doris Betts at the time to talk about a letter of recommendation. And I just burst into tears and I just told her, I went through this with the Morehead. I wasn't selected and then I got picked. And so now I haven't been selected for the Rhodes and I don't want to do this again. And she said, here's what we're going to do. If you want to do this, I will write you a letter of recommendation. I feel confident that your other referees will do the same. But she said, you need to get yourself together. She said, I need you to go down the hall to the bathroom and wipe your face up. And she said, when you come back down here, if you decide you want to apply, I'm going to help you. And I'm going to write you the best blankety-blank letter you have ever had. And so from that moment, I was on the track to apply independently. In that year, I believe the state of North Carolina had 13 Rhodes finalists and not 12. And I was one of those finalists and then went on.
Any other panelists who would like to take a stab at it?
Was that question?
Yes, absolutely.
What was the question?
So the question was, what advice would you give?
Okay. My advice would be, don't be afraid.
My advice, and it relates to Robyn's current gap year. I just took my gap year a long time ago. Do not be afraid to pause. To change directions, to go down a dead end, and don't take no for an answer.
From somebody who can't give you a yes.
From, exactly, somebody who can't give you the yes. They
That's
don't.
Oprah, that's not me.
But I know, but they don't matter. But they don't matter. And for those of us who have been, you know, as they say in the lingo, high achievers, and many of us, everybody in this room has been sort of a solo at some point, a one-off, a standout. The pressure to keep grinding down the path, whatever it is, and the expectations, you have to not be afraid to pause and make sure you are fulfilling your heart's drive, your heart's desire, your sense of mission. It may not look like what your parents thought you would be doing. It may not look like what your guidance counselor thought you should be doing. It may not look like what your current boss or mentor thinks you should be doing. The power to say, enough right now, and to trust yourself is truly so important, because the strength you get from that is what becomes your jet fuel to get where you actually not want to be, but need to be.
I think we could all riff off of what Robyn has said, because it's very inspiring, and it reminds me of something that I like to tell young people all the time, and that is to really make happen what you need to have happen. We are in a society, and certainly we are emerging from being a society where the status quo was absolutely unacceptable. And in the work that I've done, I have always not been satisfied with the status quo around me. So you do have to understand how things work, how systems work, and how you can make changes that need to be made. It can be done through litigation, community advocacy. It can be done through the policy work that you can do, but to really understand that there's a lot of change that does need to happen, and to understand that you can make those changes.
Let me say a few words. I think no matter how successful you are in your career, there will always come a time when you face obstacles. And at that time, you have to learn how to get around those obstacles, and you have to be persistent. I'll share a quick story with you. I was in my law office one day, and our offices are located on the 20th floor of the former Wachovia headquarters building in downtown Winston-Salem. And my secretary said to me that Harvey, Mrs. Jenny Roberts is on the phone and she'd like to speak with you. And out of the hundreds and hundreds of clients I've represented throughout my legal career, if I were to make a list of clients, Miss Roberts would have been my favorite client. And she lived way up in the mountains of northwestern North Carolina. And she said to me, she said, Harvey, I need your help. I've got a neighbor whose wife died 4 days after childbirth. And the family went to a lawyer up in the mountains, and he took their case, and he called them yesterday and said that he was giving them their file back, that he was not able to get a medical expert and couldn't proceed with a medical malpractice case. And the bad news was that the statute of limitations was going to run in 2 weeks. And she said, can you help us? And I told her, I said, Miss Roberts, can you have the family to be in our office at 10 o'clock the next morning? And we met with the family, and 3 days later, we had a medical expert, one of the top OBGYNs in the country. And we took that case, and it was against one of the OBGYNs in Surrey County, North Carolina. Now, Surrey County is almost all white county, okay? So my brother and I went to a mediation in the case after several months to settle the case. And we go to mediation, we make a presentation, and the defense lawyer, who was a friend of ours, one of the top medical malpractice defense attorneys in the state, and he would become president of the North Carolina Bar Association a few months later, told us, look, there's not going to be an offer in this case. We're not going to offer you any money. Our position is the doctor did nothing wrong, and we just don't see how you can win this case in Surrey County. And so my brother and I got back from that mediation, and we said, look, we need to have an integrated team of lawyers in this case. And the question we ask is, who is the top female civil litigator in Western North Carolina? And it took us 5 seconds to answer that question. It was a woman who had been a Superior Court judge for 10 years, and we had tried a big railroad case in front of her years earlier, representing a paraplegic, and we were impressed with her. And I called her up and said, Kim, these are the facts of the case, so will you join our team and help us represent this family? So anyway, to make a long story short, we go to trial in the case in Surrey County. The whole jury pool was all Caucasian. Everybody in the courtroom, all the parties, the witnesses, everybody was Caucasian, okay? And so we go to trial, and we had to deal with some very sobering facts. One is that nobody had ever won a medical malpractice case in the history of Surrey County. The second fact was it had never been a big verdict in the history of Surrey County. And although we had 3 great medical experts testifying for us, the other side had 4. They had the dean of OBGYNs in North Carolina testifying for them. It was an OBGYN by the name of Dr. Harold Pollard from Winston-Salem. And Harold Pollard was a Morehead Scholar, went to Carolina Medical School, did his residency at Harvard Medical School. But Harold was a doctor who had testified in 25 medical malpractice trials. And in all 25 cases, the verdicts were for the defense for doctors and hospitals. He was 25-0, which meant that for us to win this medical malpractice case, we had to take down Harold Pollard. So we go through the trial of the case, and our client's husband testifies. This was a case where a young woman, 30 years old, was having a baby, and there were problems with the delivery, but the doctor perforated the small bowel of the young lady, and she passed away, developed sepsis, and she died 4 days after delivery. So anyway, to make a long story short, this case lasted 3 weeks. The husband was about 6'6", a really good-looking guy. He raised Black Angus cattle. This was in like I say, way up in the mountains. This was farmland. But the husband was like just a guy that, anybody that met him would just love this guy. He was pure country, right? And so he testifies, and every woman on the jury was crying, and every man on the jury was wiping tears out of his eyes, right? So we thought at that point that, you know, we had a chance to win, but after we got over our evidence and the other side started presenting their evidence, of course, their first witness was Dr. Harold Pollard, and we had to either take him down or we were going to lose.
So
we
Harvey,
beat
how
26.
did you do it? How did you take them down?
Well, it all comes back to preparation. So we had taken Dr. Pollard's deposition one day, and Dr. Pollard, before we started the deposition, he was sort of joking around with the lawyers in the room, and he said, you know, I want to tell you about the Kennedy family, how much I admire the Kennedy family in Winston-Salem, how much they meant to us. And he went on talking about that. So we get into his deposition. I said, Dr. Pollard, can you give me one medical journal article in the United States that is directly on point with the facts of this case? And he said, yeah, there's a medical journal article. He told us the year and the name of the journal and what it was about. And he said, this is the definitive article, you know. So after the deposition, I called the head librarian at Wake Forest University Medical School, and I said, can you find this article for us? And she found it and sent it to us, and it was this case. It was right on point with this case, right? So on cross-examination of Dr. Pollard, I built him up and said, you told us about this article, and you told us it was the definitive article, and then we just used the article and just started going after. And this article says this, and you agree with this, and he backed up and said, no, I don't really agree with that. Now, you know, he tried to change his testimony, so we had him at that point. So once we finished his cross-examination, and he's leaving the witness stand, his head is bowed, and he's rushing out of the courtroom, and we knew at that time that
You had power of preparation. Power of preparation.
But to make a long story short, the jury returned a verdict for the family in the amount of $4.5 million.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we can all agree that the men and women that you see before you today are pioneers of the first order. They paved the way, they set the standard and a high bar for many of us who followed, and this is the essence of Black Morehead-Cain excellence. Please give them a round of applause.